Kill them!
Would have liked to see you again. I don't want to die.
Well, that's the opening cutscene, kiddos. I mean, I've got to give credit to Square here. Like, anybody can kill a couple humans in the intro to your video game, but when you kill a chocobo, that's fucking dark, man. That's fucking dark. And from here, the tone has been set for the remainder of the game. They let you know right from the jump that this game is dark.
Sir!
Oh. I can kill him.
So even
Oh shit!
like Kume cannot keep.
Well, guess I can't wear these. Game's too fucking dark. Also, yes, I shaved my beard. Go ahead, get your jokes out now. I know, I look like I just got back from recess. I look like I have swimming lessons after school today. I look like the guy she told you not to worry about. And I know I've already spoiled the first 29 seconds of the game, so just to cover myself for later, there will be minor spoilers. Don't worry, I will let you know when we are going to talk about spoilers, so that's coming up a bit later when we talk about the story. Again, just covering myself so I don't get canceled on Twitter again. So anyways, this game starts off with a pretty epic sequence, and the music straight away, just all of it letting me know that I was in for something a little bit different. As most of you know, I'm a pretty big Final Fantasy fan. Like, seriously, I'm like 6'5". So after a while, you kind of get in this rhythm of how the characters will be presented to you and the type of game that will unfold the more you play these types of games. Final Fantasy Type 0, however, does a really good job of letting you know from the beginning that this is going to be a very different type of experience. While I understand this could be a huge turnoff to many fans of the series, I thoroughly enjoyed the darker side, and I'm a huge advocate for darker stories in video games. So you can get out of here with all of your power of friendship bullshit and your Captain Planet heart rings. No time for that shit over here. Final Fantasy Type 0. This game is dark. The chocobo. One thing you will have to understand going into this game is that it is a port from the PSP. You know, the system that literally nobody wanted. Anyways, the PSP obviously had its graphical limitations, so this game was a bit handicapped, but I feel like it did a pretty good job overall. I fortunately don't have a PSP, so I did play the PC port of this game. And we all know how good Square is at porting their games over to PC, right? It was a joke. They're actually
very bad.
And graphical limitations aside, the game did choose to use this like brownish green filter to cover most of the cutscenes and a lot of the game. Maybe this was just their way of trying to dull the colors and make the game seem a bit darker. Either way, that's something I noticed straight from the beginning. It's not really enough to distract from the narrative, but just maybe something on a newer system, like an updated version, would be really cool to see. Also, there's like 5 NPC faces that they just keep recycling throughout the world. So again, it's not game breaking. It is enough to be forgivable, but it is something you'll notice. The environments are pretty varied. The open world is pretty basic and bland. But again, these are all pretty much limitations of the PSP. So overall, I feel like the concepts were there, but they just didn't have enough firepower, I guess, to really create what they envisioned from the beginning. Like, if I were a kid back in 1994, wait, when were PSPs around anyways? Oh, if I were a kid back in the early 2000s, I would have been stoked to play this type of game, you know, on portable device. Except for the chocobo part. Some character designs and enemy sprites were updated on the PC version, but mainly it was just the main cast and some of the main story characters. Other than that, many of the characters missed the cut. So not necessarily a complaint on the original game, but just god damn it, Square. We deserve better. I mean, he deserves better. Now the gameplay. Final Fantasy Type 0 adds a ton of cool concepts to this game, which make it feel like its very own game. It's set on an open world map, which is huge because the last game in the series that had an open world map was Final Fantasy IX, which was like 11 years prior to this. Now I know that's one of the major complaints that people like to have with Square, that these Final Fantasy games as of late are too linear, but they've made this change years ago, long time ago, that they were headed in a different direction with this series. They've clearly decided to focus more on gameplay and storytelling and visuals than just the open world exploration. Anyways, back to Type 0. You control an entire class of students from the extraordinary class of Class 0. Yes, class, because they are all children. Damn anime. There are 12 original class members and then 2 added members that get added to the party pretty much from the beginning of the game. Hey guys, future editing Wada here. I forgot to mention that the characters you play as in the main cast, they're all named after the cards in the deck of cards. So for instance, you have Ace, Deuce, Trey, Cater. Basically, they're just all names of 1 through 12 in the deck of cards in different languages. So I don't know why I forgot to mention that, but anyways, back to the video. You will set out to progress in the story in a mission-based style, similar to Crisis Core, kind of like Stranger of Paradise as well. And there will be some objectives in between those missions to complete also. Between missions, you will be given a certain limit of time, however, so you do have to be careful and you won't be able to complete every single task in one playthrough, which is unfortunate. This was probably one of my biggest gripes with the game because unless you're using a guide or a walkthrough, you're probably going to miss a ton of these hidden details and important lore elements scattered throughout the game. For example, some tasks require you to use a specific character to talk to a certain NPC. Also, some NPCs can just be scattered all across the world map and you don't really have quest markers for them. So yeah, it gets a bit convoluted from the beginning. I mean, even leaving the school to level your characters costs you 6 hours of time. So you have to even be diligent when walking in and out of the school, deciding how you're going to spend your time in between missions. The combat is action-based, and whenever you're on a mission, you're just going to fight enemies in a typical dungeon style just throughout the level. When you're on the open world map, however, it will warp you into a battle arena, kind of like most of the open world Final Fantasy games. And there you will fight the enemies, 3 to 4 enemies. And depending on the type of encounter, you may be asked to fight multiple different hordes of enemies for extra rewards and experience points. Now, the combat itself is kind of janky depending on which character you're using, but it's so varied beyond the characters that it's kind of one of those elements that I can forgive because, again, you get 14 different characters to choose from. Each character has their own weapons and play style, so it does keep it from getting too bogged down and worried about the battle mechanics because there's so many different characters to choose from. Obviously, some characters will naturally be better than others just because of the combat style, and others will be less than ideal to play just because maybe their combat systems just don't work in this type of game. This is kind of Final Fantasy Type 0 in a nutshell, where they're just trying a ton of different things and some things land and some things don't. While a majority of the missions are simple, just go here, beat these bad guys, come back, turn in the mission, some of them are done on the overworld map, kind of like a tactical RPG strategy simulator sort of game, almost like a Dynasty Warriors, discount Dynasty Warriors, if you will. However, these missions are extremely slow paced. It was good to see them try out this idea and give a little variance to the mission styles, but luckily these weren't required to do, as the game constantly pretty much begs you not to do these missions, saying you don't have to, and they do allow you to skip them, which I thought was weird. Are you sure this is the mission you want to proceed with? Yes. Are you positive you want to play this mission? Yes. You know you don't really have to do this. Are you sure? Yes. This is your last chance to skip. Are you positive? Yes. Okay, this is really, really, really your last chance to skip. Yes. I should have skipped. The battles can be pretty difficult based on your level, and they do bring a bit of challenge to the game, which I really enjoy. In my playthrough, I unfortunately didn't level enough, so some of the battles were far more difficult than they should have been. But the game does give you enough tools, and you do have enough characters to try out different tactics and try to scrape your way through to get the victory. Some of the difficulty in missions comes from the fact that if a character dies in a mission, they can't be revived until the mission is over. And there are some missions where there are scripted deaths. So if you're using your best character to help clear the level and you run into one of these trigger points, your character will just be one-shotted and you can't use your best character for the remainder of the mission, which sucks. Other times the game is just going to make you split your parties into multiple groups. So with all of that, you're not able to just focus on one or two characters. You do have to use quite a few of them. Again, this can be a good or bad thing depending on how you look at it. For me personally, it ended up being a good thing because I found about 7 characters, which by the end, I couldn't decide which one was my favorite. I mean, it was Seiss. It was always Seiss. So now the story. This is the part where the spoilers are going to start. So skip ahead to this time. I guess we'll put it here. Skip ahead to this time if you don't want to hear any spoilers, and come back. This is your final warning, I guess. Never done this before. Okay, now that the nerds are gone, super brief and basic synopsis here. So as we stated earlier, you play as a special class of soldiers that are able to use magic, and they are able to be revived by Dr. Aracia, also known as Mother.
Ma'am, this is a non-smoking area.
Dr. Aracia is more than just human. She's actually a very powerful entity, which is not obvious to you in the beginning of the game. Even by the end of the game, we're not quite sure the true extent of her powers, but she is the creator of the 4 crystals, which each of the nations base their power on, and is the driving force of the eternal war in the world of Orience. Stay with me. Each crystal chooses a champion or a lessee to do its bidding, and that individual is granted extreme powers. So with these nations in a constant war over the crystals, Class 0 is deployed to fight on behalf of the Vermilion Berg crystal, and is also used as a tool for the government and its political power plays. Now, the reason any of this becomes important is at the beginning of the game, the soldier that dies in the opening cutscene that we saw is the brother of Machina, who actually becomes the 13th member of Class 0. Machina's brother was requested to help with this mission specifically by Ace, who is the first member of Class 0, and most of the story elements are kind of driven through this revelation. Where this gets confusing is Dr. Aracia imbued the crystals with the ability to wipe the memories from all the living of all those who have died. Therefore, the living would not live in regret or sorrow with the constant warring of the nations. All of these points build up to the perfect storm of events with Ace and Machina both forgetting the identity of the soldier who did die in the beginning of the game, and the conflicts as they both begin to unravel the truth. This obviously begins to cause a huge divide with some of the students within the class. So while there is a larger theme of global war and destruction, there's constant focus on each of the class members and their battles with morality. Skipping way ahead, the story boils down to different characters trying to become the Agito. Legend tells of a hero that will be chosen at the rise of Tempus Finis, which is basically the end of times. So the cadets decline the offer of the Vermilion Crystal and to become a lessee, and decide to fight Cid Alstein instead of the White Tiger Crystal, who is also attempting to become the Agito. The Vermilion Crystal then chooses Rem, who is the 14th member of the class and also a very close friend of Machina. Machina, however, is chosen by the White Tiger Crystal, and the two friends end up fighting against each other on the crystal's behalf. The remainder of Class 0 decides to sacrifice themselves and their ability to be revived to fight for a better world and defeat Cid Alstein and live happily ever after. Oh, right, sorry, this is Final Fantasy Type 0. They die. They all die. The Chocobo. They're also crying and talking about how sad they are to be dying and how much more they had left to do in their life. There were so many moments like this in this game where characters are faced with their own mortality and with their dying breaths are still talking about how terrified they are to be dying. This game has really captured, I think, the essence of death and dealing with death, more so than many games that I've played. By the end cutscenes, you do realize that Dr. Aracia has been observing these events countless times before, as she is the world of Orient on a cycle, or a spiral as they call it. She has apparently watched over 600 million spirals, and this was the first time the events played out in this particular manner. Again, most of these small hints are sprinkled throughout the game, which makes this worth a second playthrough. I won't get into every detail about the story because there's just so much here to unpack, but those are a few of the highlights for me personally, and where I believe the game really excelled. There are plenty more sad character deaths throughout the game, and just the fact that people are constantly battling memories of loved ones that they've forgotten or close friends that they've fought with. It just adds this super dark element to it. If this interests you at all, I highly recommend you give this game a try. Okay, welcome back, you nerds that didn't want to see spoilers. Welcome back to the soundtrack, I suppose, and we all know how much I love talking about the soundtrack in these video games. You know the soundtrack is always under a microscope with me. I feel like this game does a very good job with its soundtrack. This is not something I'm probably going to listen to on its own. I feel like this isn't really too much of a standalone soundtrack where the music just fits any scene or any situation. But the soundtrack does, however, match the theme of the game perfectly. The soundtrack does such a good job of creating an atmosphere, making you feel a certain type of way, depending on what's happening on screen, of course. But it does have some very chilling soundtracks and some very upbeat soundtracks and some very hard-hitting ones for some of those boss battles to really get you pumped. There are also those few classic themes and Final Fantasy songs, just to remind you, you are in fact playing a Final Fantasy games.
Here goes.
So soundtrack overall, got to give it the 2 thumbs up. So my final thoughts on the game. A majority of the nuances of the story and the lore and just history of the game are lost if you don't go and discover each of those pieces for yourself. So that is a bit of a positive and a negative. I do like uncovering all those sorts of things, but I also like playing games without a guide and just kind of discovering it on my own. I feel like it's very difficult to do with this game. However, there is such a deep history and rich lore that it is definitely worth discovering. However, if you do want to discover all the lore, it is possibly going to require multiple playthroughs, or you are going to just need to cave and play it with a guide, which I do understand it does sour the experience for some people. The gameplay is not revolutionary, but I do feel it's not enough to distract you from the narrative of the game, and it is unique enough to keep you engaged. There's also enough characters in the game for pretty much everyone to find a character they either really like or they really despise, and I feel like that's pretty good for character building. As long as you can get past the PSP limitations for this game, I feel like there's a ton to enjoy, and this game has so much to offer. So for all of those reasons, I'm gonna have to give this game 8 extremely dark and really edgy watermelons out of 10. Pretty decent. I'm happy with that. Also, I'd like to apologize. I'm obviously sick. I was meant to get this video out a little bit earlier, but I haven't been able to talk properly, so it's a few days late, but thank you guys for hanging out and sticking it out with me. The show must go on. See you guys in the next video. Peace.